Picture this. You're sitting in math class on a Tuesday afternoon. The clock on the wall reads 2:47. Your teacher is writing equations on the board. Someone in the back row is tapping their pencil. Everything is normal. Everything is safe. Then the intercom crackles to life. Attention! We are now in lockdown. This is not a drill. Teachers, secure your classrooms immediately. Your heart stops. The pencil tapping stops. Even the clock seems to stop ticking. In that moment, normal doesn't exist anymore. Safety becomes a memory. And you realize that the person sitting next to you, the teacher at the front of the room, even you, might not make it home today. That's what happened to hundreds of students across America. Students who thought they were safe. Students who never imagined their school could become a place of fear. Today, I'm going to tell you 3 true stories. 3 real lockdowns that happen at real schools with real kids just like you. The first story will show you how a single decision can mean the difference between life and death. The second will prove that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's happening. It's not knowing what's happening. And the third story will leave you with questions that nobody, not the police, not the FBI, not even people who lived through it, can answer. These aren't made-up horror stories. These aren't urban legends. These are real events that happen to real people. And after you hear them, you'll never look at a school lockdown the same way again. Before we begin, I need to say something. What you're about to hear involves real trauma experienced by real students and teachers. These people lived through genuine fear. Some of them still wake up at night thinking about what happened. So while these stories are incredible, they're also incredibly serious. Let's start with Jefferson Middle School in Ohio. November 15th, 2019. A day that should have been ordinary. A day that became anything but. Story 1. Maria Rodriguez had been teaching 7th grade math for 12 years. 12 years of pop quizzes and parent conferences and kids who forgot their homework. She thought she'd seen everything. She was wrong. It was a cold Tuesday afternoon at Jefferson Middle School in Columbus, Ohio. 28 kids sat in her classroom, most of them only half paying attention to fractions on the whiteboard. Outside, gray November clouds hung low over the parking lot. Inside, the heater hummed quietly in the corner. At exactly 3:15, everything changed. The fire alarm went off. Loud, piercing, impossible to ignore. Every kid in the room looked up. Some started reaching for their backpacks. Fire drills were routine. They knew what to do. Line up, walk outside, wait for the all-clear. But Mrs. Rodriguez didn't move. See, here's what the kids didn't know. 20 minutes earlier, the school had been practicing lockdown procedures. Not a real lockdown, just practice. The kind of drill they did every month since Columbine changed everything. The kind of drill that every American school has to do now. During that practice drill, Mrs. Rodriguez had noticed something. She looked out her classroom window and seen a man standing by the fence. A man who didn't belong there. A man who was watching the school a little too carefully. So when that fire alarm started blaring, Mrs. Rodriguez made a choice. A choice that would save lives. Nobody moved, she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. Stay in your seats. But Mrs. Rodriguez, said Tyler, a kid in the front row, it's a fire drill. We have to go outside. No, she said, we don't. She walked to the door and looked out the little window. The hallway was empty, completely empty. No other teachers, no other students, no administrators telling everyone to evacuate. In 12 years of teaching, she had never seen the hallways empty during a fire alarm. Never. Something was wrong. She locked the classroom door, turned off the lights, told her students to get away from the windows and be quiet. 28 confused kids suddenly realized this wasn't a drill anymore. Mrs. Rodriguez, whispered Sarah, a quiet girl who always sat in the back. What's happening? I don't know, Mrs. Rodriguez admitted. But we're staying right here until I figure out. For 15 minutes, they sat in the dark. 28 kids and one teacher who was praying she'd made the right choice. The fire alarm kept going, and going, and going, way longer than any normal fire drill. Then they heard them. Sirens. Not just one or two. Dozens of them. Police cars, ambulances, fire trucks. The parking lot filled with flashing lights. Through her classroom window, Mrs. Rodriguez could see police officers with their guns drawn. She could see parents behind yellow tape, crying and screaming and trying to get to the school. She could see news vans pulling up. That's when she knew. That's when she realized her gut feeling had been right. At 3:47, 32 minutes after the fire alarm started, Principal Johnson's voice came over the intercom. But it wasn't his normal voice. It was tight, scared. All clear. The threat has been neutralized. Teachers, please maintain lockdown positions until law enforcement gives further instructions. Threat. He said threat. It took another hour before police officers came to unlock Mrs. Rodriguez's door. Another hour of sitting in the dark with 28 scared kids who were starting to understand how close they'd come to something terrible. Here's what they found out later. That man Mrs. Rodriguez had seen by the fence, his name was David Kellner, 34 years old, armed with a handgun, and what police call materials for causing harm. The fire alarm hadn't been a drill. It had been triggered by a janitor who'd seen Kellner trying to get into the school through a side entrance. The plan was simple and terrifying. Wait for everyone to evacuate for the fire alarm, then enter the building while it was in chaos, while teachers and students were standing outside in neat little groups, completely exposed. But Mrs. Rodriguez had ruined that plan. Her decision to keep her students inside had started a chain reaction. Other teachers, seeing her classroom lights off and door locked, had done the same thing. Instead of hundreds of people standing outside like sitting ducks, most of the school had gone into lockdown. Kellner was arrested in the parking lot, confused and angry that his plan hadn't worked. Police found detailed maps of the school in his car. Maps with escape routes marked in red. Maps that showed he'd been planning this for months. 28 kids went home that day because their math teacher trusted her instincts, because she chose to break the rules when following them would have gotten people killed. But here's the thing about lockdowns. Sometimes making the right choice isn't enough. Sometimes even when you do everything perfectly, the system fails you anyway. Which brings us to our second story. Story 2. Riverside High School in Austin, Texas. March 8th, 2021. The world was still weird from COVID. Kids were just getting back to normal school after a year of masks and remote learning and social distancing. Everyone was on edge already. Everyone was jumpy. Principal Mike Anderson had been running schools for 20 years. He'd handled everything from food fights to bomb threats. He thought he knew how to manage a crisis. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. It started with a phone call at 2:17 in the afternoon. A woman's voice, shaky and scared. "There's a man with a gun near the school," she said. "I saw him in the parking lot by the gym. He had something in his hand, something that looked like a weapon." Principal Anderson didn't hesitate. Lockdown. Immediately. Within 60 seconds, 1,200 students and 80 staff members were locked in their classrooms, lights off, doors secured. The call went out to police. Armed suspect on school grounds, requesting immediate assistance. What happened next was like a nightmare in fast forward. Squad cars flooded the parking lot. The SWAT team was called in. A helicopter circled overhead. News crews showed up. Parents started arriving, panic in their eyes, desperate for information about their kids. Inside the school, students were texting their parents. "We're in lockdown. There's a shooter. I love you." Parents were calling the school, but the phone lines were jammed. Social media exploded with rumors. Active shooter at Riverside High. Multiple casualties. Kids trapped. None of it was true, but nobody knew that yet. Officer Lisa Martinez was the school resource officer. She'd been working at Riverside for 3 years. She knew every hallway, every exit, every hiding spot. When the lockdown started, she grabbed her radio and began sweeping the building. "This is Martinez," she whispered into her radio. "I'm checking the east wing. No sign of suspect. Copy that. We have units surrounding the building. Suspect is described as white male, average height, wearing dark clothing, armed." That description could have fit half the men in Austin. For 2 hours, 1,200 kids sat in locked classrooms. 2 hours of silence except for helicopters overhead and parents crying in the parking lot. 2 hours of checking phones for updates that never came. 2 hours of wondering if they were going to die. Emma Watson was a junior. She was in chemistry class when the lockdown started. 26 kids crammed into a storage closet, trying to stay quiet. Her teacher, Mr. Phillips, kept checking his watch, kept looking at the door. After the first hour, some kids started crying. After the second hour, they were all convinced they were going to die. I texted my mom that I loved her. Emma later told reporters, "I really thought those might be my last words to her." But here's where everything went wrong. The police were looking for the wrong person. See, that phone call at 217, the one about the man with a gun, the caller had been right. There was a man near the school, but he wasn't armed. He was a construction worker named Roberto Sanchez, fixing a broken water pipe behind the gym. The weapon in his hand was a pipe wrench, but the description that went out to police was vague. Armed man near the school. So when Officer Jenkins spotted James Morrison walking across the parking lot at 3:45, he fit the description well enough. James Morrison was 34 years old. He was picking up his daughter from soccer practice. He had no idea the school was in lockdown. He had no idea police were looking for an armed suspect. He was just a dad walking to his car. "Stop. Police. Get on the ground." James froze. He couldn't understand what was happening. Behind him, his 8-year-old daughter Sarah was running toward him, excited to show him the goal she'd scored at practice. "Daddy, look what I..." "Sarah, get back!" James screamed, but she kept running. What happened next lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Officer Jenkins saw the man turn, saw a small figure running toward him. In the stress of the moment, with adrenaline pumping, and everyone expecting a school shooter, his training kicked in. He drew his weapon. Gun. I have a weapon drawn on suspect." James Morrison threw himself between the officer and his daughter. "Don't shoot. That's my kid. Backup officers arrived. The situation was contained. Nobody was hurt, but the damage was done. It took another hour to sort everything out. Another hour before they realized the armed suspect was a construction worker who'd already gone home for the day. Another hour before 1,200 kids found out they'd been locked down for 3 hours because of a pipe wrench. The lockdown was lifted at 5:23 p.m., 3 hours and 6 minutes after it started. Parents rushed into the building, grabbing their kids, crying, angry. Some kids couldn't stop shaking. Others were numb, like they were in shock. But the real damage wasn't just the fear. It was the trust that was broken. "How could you not know?" demanded Patricia Williams, whose son Marcus was a sophomore. "How could you keep our kids locked up for 3 hours and not know what was actually happening?" Principal Anderson tried to explain. "We followed protocol. When we get a report of an armed person, we have to." "You kept them locked up because of a construction worker?" another parent shouted. "Because someone called in a pipe wrench?" The investigation took weeks. They found communication failures at every level. The original caller hadn't been clear enough. The police dispatcher hadn't asked the right questions. The description that went out was too vague. Officers on scene weren't coordinating properly. The school administration had no way to get real information about what was happening outside. And through it all, 1,200 kids had been trapped in their classrooms, convinced they were about to die. Some families sued the school district. Others pulled their kids out and enrolled them somewhere else. The kids who stayed weren't the same. They jumped at loud noises. They had panic attacks during regular lockdown drills. Some couldn't focus in class anymore, always looking at the door, always ready to run. Emma Watson, the girl who texted her mom from the chemistry storage closet, transferred to a private school the next month. "I can't forget the feeling," she told a local reporter. "Thinking I was going to die and not knowing why, not knowing if help was coming, not knowing if my parents would ever see me again. The system that was supposed to protect them had failed, not because people didn't care, but because fear and bad communication had turned a simple misunderstanding into a 3-hour nightmare. But at least that story had an explanation. At least they figured out what went wrong. Our third story, that's different. That's the kind of story that keeps investigators awake at night, trying to solve a puzzle that might not have a solution. Story 3. Pine Valley Elementary sits at the end of a dead-end road in Oregon, surrounded by tall trees and farmland. It's the kind of school where everybody knows everybody. 150 kids, grades K through 5. The kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. Until October 12, 2022. Lisa Chin had been teaching second grade for 8 years. Room 14, right at the end of the main hallway. 22 kids, ages 7 and 8. Kids who still believed teachers could fix anything. Kids who thought school was the safest place in the world. That morning started like every other morning. Circle time at 8:30. Reading groups at 9:15. Math at 10:45. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. At 11:30 a.m., the intercom crackled on. "Attention all staff. We are now in lockdown due to an external threat. Please secure your classrooms immediately and await further instructions." Mrs. Chun had done this drill dozens of times. Lock the door. Turn off the lights. Move the kids away from the windows. Keep everyone calm and quiet. But as she reached for the light switch, something felt different. The voice on the intercom hadn't been Principal Jackson's voice. It had been off somehow. The words were right, but the tone was wrong. Like someone reading from a script. She turned off the lights anyway. Locked the door. Gathered her 22 kids in the reading corner, away from the windows and the door. "Mrs. Chun," whispered Mia, a little girl with pigtails. "What's happening?" "It's just a practice," Mrs. Chun said softly. "We're playing the quiet game, remember? Like hide and seek." The kids nodded. They'd practiced this before. They knew the rules. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Mrs. Chun kept checking her watch. Kept listening for sounds in the hallway. Usually during lockdown drills, you could hear other teachers moving around, talking quietly, footsteps in the distance. This time there was nothing. Complete silence. 15 minutes. 20. The kids were getting restless. Some were starting to ask when they could go back to math. Others looked scared. At 11:45, Mrs. Chin made a decision. She crept to the classroom door and looked out through the little window. The hallway was empty, completely empty. No other teachers standing guard. No administrators walking around. No custodial staff. Nothing. That was strange, but not impossible. Maybe everyone was just being extra careful. She waited 5 more minutes, then looked again. Still empty. At 12 o'clock, 30 minutes into the lockdown, Mrs. Chin started to worry. Lockdown drills at Pine Valley never lasted more than 15 minutes. Never. She pulled out her cell phone and sent a text to Janet Miller, the 3rd grade teacher in the room next door. "Janet, how long is this lockdown supposed to last?" She waited for a reply. Nothing. She tried calling the main office. The phone rang and rang. No answer. That's when the fear started creeping in. At 12:15, 45 minutes after the lockdown started, Mrs. Chin made a decision that she still can't fully explain. She told her 22 kids to stay exactly where they were. She unlocked the classroom door, and she stepped into the hallway. What she found there changed her life forever. The school was empty, not just quiet. Empty. She walked to Janet Miller's classroom. Door locked, lights off, but when she peered through the window, there was nobody inside. She tried the office. Empty. The library. Empty. The gym. Empty. 150 kids and 80 staff members had simply vanished. She ran back to her classroom, her heart pounding. Her 22 students were exactly where she'd left them, sitting quietly in the reading corner, trusting her to keep them safe. "Mrs. Chun," said Tommy, a boy with freckles and a gap-toothed smile, "can we go to lunch now?" She looked at her watch. 12:17. Lunch was supposed to start at 12 o'clock. "Not yet, sweetie. We need to wait a little longer." But wait for what? Wait for who? If everyone else was gone, who was going to tell them the lockdown was over? At 12:30, 1 hour after it all started, Mrs. Chun heard footsteps in the hallway. Relief flooded through her body. Finally, someone was coming to tell them it was safe. She looked out the door window and saw Principal Jackson walking down the hall. Normal. Everything looked normal. She unlocked her door and stepped out. "Mr. Jackson," she called. "How much longer is the lockdown going to?" He turned around, and the look on his face stopped her cold. He looked confused, genuinely confused. "Lockdown," he said. "What lockdown?" "The lockdown that started an hour ago. The announcement over the intercom. External threat." Principal Jackson stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Mrs. Chun, there's no lockdown. There hasn't been any announcement. I've been in my office all morning." But where is everyone? The school was empty. All the classrooms were empty. "What are you talking about?" "Mrs. Patterson is teaching math right now. Mr. Rodriguez has his kids in the gym. Everyone's exactly where they're supposed to be." Mrs. Chun felt like she was losing her mind. She led Principal Jackson to Janet Miller's classroom. Through the window, they could see Mrs. Miller at the whiteboard, teaching a lesson on fractions. 25 kids sitting at their desks, paying attention. But an hour ago, that room had been empty, dark, silent. They checked every classroom. Every single one had a teacher and students, all going about their normal day. Nobody looked like they'd been in lockdown. Nobody looked scared or confused. It was like the last hour had never happened. Like Mrs. Chun and her 22 students had been trapped in some kind of time bubble while the rest of the world went on without them. The police were called, not for a lockdown, but for what Principal Jackson was calling a medical episode. He was convinced Mrs. Chun had had some kind of breakdown. Stress, maybe hallucinations. But the kids backed up her story. All 22 of them. They remembered the announcement. They remembered sitting in the dark for an hour. They remembered Mrs. Chun leaving the room and coming back scared. Officer David Park interviewed each child separately. Same story every time. They'd been in lockdown for an hour while everyone else vanished. But that's impossible, Officer Park told Principal Jackson. "I've been parked outside the school since 10:30 this morning. Nobody left. No buses, no cars, no people walking. If everyone had evacuated, I would have seen it." The investigation went on for weeks. They pulled security camera footage from every angle, every hallway, every entrance. Here's what they found. At 11:30 a.m., the cameras showed Mrs. Chen's classroom door closing and the lights going out. For the next hour and 15 minutes, there was no movement in the hallways. No people, no activity, nothing. Just empty corridors. But in every other classroom, the cameras showed normal activity. Teachers teaching. Kids learning. Life going on as usual. It was like Mrs. Chen's classroom had been cut off from reality. Like she and her 22 students had slipped into some other version of the school where everyone else had disappeared. The FBI got involved. Not officially. But Agent Sarah Martinez came down from Portland to look at the case. She'd seen strange things before. Unexplained things. but nothing like this. The security footage doesn't lie, she told Principal Jackson. For 75 minutes, Mrs. Chen's classroom existed in isolation, while the rest of the school continued normally. I can't explain it. Nobody can explain it. The school district sealed the investigation files. Too many questions, not enough answers. The official report listed it as a technical malfunction in the security system, combined with miscommunication regarding drill procedures. But Mrs. Chen knows what she experienced. And so do her 22 students. 6 months later, some of those kids were still having nightmares. Not about a school shooter or a dangerous person. About being forgotten. About being left behind in an empty building while the world moved on without them. Mrs. Chun transferred to a different school district at the end of that year. She could have walked down the hallway at Pine Valley without remembering that hour when she was completely, impossibly alone with 22 scared children. The strangest part? When investigators checked the intercom system, they found no record of any announcement being made at 11:30 a.m. on October 12th. The system showed normal activity all day. No emergency broadcasts. No lockdown alerts. But Mrs. Chin heard it. Her students heard it. A voice that wasn't Principal Jackson's voice, announcing a lockdown that never officially happened. To this day, nobody can explain where that voice came from, or where everyone else went during that lost hour at Pine Valley Elementary. 3 schools, 3 lockdowns, 3 completely different realities. These stories remind us of something important. Schools are supposed to be safe places. Places where kids can learn and grow and become who they're meant to be. But we live in a world where safety can't be guaranteed, where normal can disappear in seconds, where the difference between life and death sometimes comes down to a teacher's instincts or dispatcher's mistake, or something that nobody can explain. The students and teachers in these stories are real people. They lived through real fear. They made real sacrifices. And they want their experiences to mean something. They want other people to be prepared, to stay calm, to trust their instincts when something doesn't feel right. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Stay alert, stay calm, and remember that sometimes the person sitting next to you in math class is depending on you to make the right choice when everything goes wrong. If you've experienced a lockdown at your school, you're not alone. If these stories brought back difficult memories, please talk to someone you trust. And if you're a teacher or a parent or someone who works with kids, remember that preparation and communication can save lives. But also remember that sometimes, no matter how well you prepare, strange things happen that nobody can explain. The important thing is that we're all here. We're all still telling stories. And as long as we keep listening to each other, as long as we keep learning from what happened, maybe we can make sure the next story has a better ending.